Now, before we plunge into this episode, we want to give a big shout out to our wonderful sponsor, Wylde Market, the online farmers market that's making food feel exciting again.
Yeah, it's proper food made by real people. And we're not reading a script here. Well, I am actually reading a script, but we love Wylde Market.
Yeah.
We are fully on board with the ethos, and we just love their food.
And it's, it really is a treat and an exciting thing to see all this food and drink. Usually, if the sponsor, we have to be nice about the sponsor. Actually, we love Port and we love Wylde Market, but this is genuinely exciting. This is the future of online shopping and the farmers market online.
The whole process is ridiculously easy. Just go to the website, download the app, make shopping really easy.
And it's transparent. You get straight, you're, the producer, you're seeing who the producer is, you're buying direct, Wylde Market's just bringing it to you. It is fabulous.
And the mechanics are very simple. The market opens Friday, 5 p.m. It's a sort of bell to start shopping.
And you browse at your leisure at the weekend. Things are being added all the time over the weekend. And basically, you make up your mind and you order what you want by 12 o'clock on Wednesday. That's when the market closes. And then, of course, the food comes and is delivered on the Friday after midday. So, in time for the weekend to fill your boots with good food.
And it comes, they'll do all over mainland Britain, and it all comes in one box full of ice packs and things. So it's all super fresh.
And it's food, it's proper British food. And we've got the wonderful Taz coming from Wylde Market to tell you how you can get your hands on a £50 credit from Wylde Market.
How exciting. If you want to connect with great producers and find real pleasure in food, it's time to go wild.
And so here, and thank you to Wylde Market. And if you want to go to Wylde Market, it's www.wyldemarket, and it is WYLDE, or get the app for your phone, which makes things even more simple. So, yes. Anyway, after the joys of Wylde Market, now time to get on with this episode of Intoxicating History.
We lived very simply, but with all the essentials of life well understood and provided for. Hot baths, cold champagne, new peas, and old brandy. So who was I doing an impression of?
A very good impression of Winston Churchill. I think your Winston Churchill impression is brilliant. And of course, on this episode of Intoxicating History, we are delving into the drinking habits of one of the great figures, one of the great men of British history, Sir Winston Churchill, who, as we all know, liked to drink.
He liked to drink. In fact, he's one of those people who's proved a gift to drink marketers over these. Probably only Napoleon comes close for drinks trying to associate themselves with someone in order to sell. I think Churchill, Napoleon are the two kind of great icons of drink.
And I think the key to Churchill, if you look at it in this rather dour Presbyterian age we now live in. You look at his alcohol, consumption, which we'll come on to later. A lot of people saying, well, he's an alcoholic and all the rest of it. I think what's really important to set up at the beginning is the context in which it was. The Victorians and the Edwardians lived especially the upper classes, ate a lot more than us and drunk a lot more than we do. On the one hand, there was no central heating back then, especially in Victorian times, so it was cold. There was a lot more racing and hunting, and there was also outdoor pursuits, shooting. So you look at the greats of Edward VII, and who was a great eater and drinker, and Churchill. So to judge it by our standards, judge Churchill's drinking by our standards, gets it slightly wrong. I mean, it was a great time for drinking, wasn't it, Victoria?
It was, and Churchill was in was in India.
Yeah.
So he served in India in the what was his regiment called? He was in the 4th Hussars.
Yeah.
And he, the water was a bit dodgy. People were coming down with all kinds of things. And what a lot of the officers did was they, typhoid, cholera, those sort of things that if you get, they're not just a sort of a sort of dicky belly. They would debilitate you. So he wrote, this is what he wrote in his early life, Churchill. I might do another Churchill impression.
Yeah, do. I love it.
The water was not fit to drink. To make it palatable, we had to add whisky. By diligent effort, I learned to like it. Not a great Churchill impression, but anyway.
It was a good one, yeah. But that was, part of the legend of Churchill was this idea that he woke up and had a whiskey and soda for breakfast. This is where it comes from. But actually, he called it mouthwash.
Yeah.
And he'd
or,
have
or
it.
it was called a pupper cocktail.
Or a
but-
pupper cocktail,
yeah.
but it was incredibly weak. It was what my grandfather described as a sort of, there was nut brown, which is a very, very strong one, and then it's literally just scenting, whispering into the water. So this idea that he was knocking back half a bottle of whiskey at breakfast is entirely untrue. I mean, it's not quite like others to have whiskey and soda for breakfast, have a week, and a glass of sherry as he did as he got older. He liked a glass of sherry. But yeah, so again, this started in India, this idea that they drunk a lot in India, didn't they?
Yeah.
Especially the officer class and the soldier class as well.
I think so. And apparently his mouthwash, as he called it, was sort of 1 or 2 measures of Johnny Walker Red Label in a tumbler, lots of ice, lots of soda water, full to the brim. And apparently he would be continually sipping that, but very, very slowly. So it might last him a few hours. It wasn't, a snifter quickly knocked back.
But what would be, the people would come in and out, especially as he became prime minister and all the rest of it, and they would just assume that he had a constant flow of whiskey because he always had this glass of whiskey with him in the morning. But again, it was very, very weak.
Yeah, but he was a great. He was a heroic drinker. So after India, he went to the Boer War, but as a newspaper correspondent for the Morning Post, and then he came with obviously with his pith helmet and his boots and stuff, with 36 bottles of wine. This was age 25, arriving in South Africa. 36 bottles of wine, 18 bottles of Scotch whiskey, and 6 bottles of vintage brandy. So I mean, this was an incredibly expensive lifestyle to keep going.
And what we always, Churchill always lived beyond his means. He was born at Blenheim Palace. He sort of had a very ducal approach to money, very, very common money. You don't talk about money. If the bank manager comes in the back door, you just spend. And if the bank manager says, "Excuse me, sir, you're a bit overdrawn, but get away with you," and in those days you could run up vast overdrafts by being a toff. But he did spend recklessly this sybaritic lifestyle on a journalist's wage. He wasn't a rich man. He wasn't a duke. Despite his upper class beginnings and being very much a member of the upper class, but he wasn't massively rich, and he was always, the whole way through his life, overspending. There was constantly, him and Clementine were always sort of having to cut back on stuff. We'll come to that later. But this is not, hey, let's go and party. This isn't like, chucking all in a bucket and let's go and drink. This was, he felt this was necessary fuel, to get through as a journalist, reporting on the Boer War.
Yeah, yeah. And just sort of back to another measure of his drinking, he had an account at Randolph Payne and Sons, which was a very sort of old school wine
long-suffering
merchant.
wine
His
merchant.
long-suffering wine merchant. He was like, Mr. Churchill, are you going to pay the last? But anyway, so this is an invoice from 1908, and it's for 9 dozen bottles, that's 108 bottles of Paul Roger 1895, 7 dozen half bottles of Paul Roger 1895, and 4 dozen half bottles of Paul Roger 1900. So he loved his Paul Roger.
And why Paul? I mean, Paul Roger, for me, as a not a great expert, is for the non-vintage one of the great. At the price, it's like what makes Paul Roger so great?
The style is quite Pinot Noir heavy, so it's sort of richer than ones that use Chardonnay. And then nowadays, I think Paul Roger, they own a lot of their own vineyards, a lot of people, so they have a better control over it. And it's a smaller house. They don't have to make such quantities as, say, Moet or Veuve Clicquot. They can kind of concentrate on it a bit more. And but there's a sort of family connection which we'll come on to with Paul Roger. But you were talking about Churchill overspending.
Yeah.
So this sort of, what's wonderful is his sort of what's known as his wilderness years. So he was out of power, out of Parliament, in the sort of 1920s and 30s, and there's a wonderful book by actually I don't know how to pronounce his name. David Luff, I assume.
Yeah.
It's called No More Champagne: Churchill and His Money, and it's so he owed his long-suffering wine merchant the equivalent of about £75,000.
Those are the days.
In 1936, which is just kind of extraordinary, isn't it?
And the whole thing was he always lived in between Duke and Prime Minister, rather than a sort of rather lowly backbench MP on a rather lowly backbench MP's salary. He never bothered to say with something as ghastly and middle class as economising or think, but look at this. I mean, I love this here. In 1935, he spent £515 on alcohol. His backbencher's salary was only £360 a year. So basically his alcohol bill was roughly 140% of his official government income. He knew how to live, and he was never going to change. Had no interest in economising whatsoever.
And he was getting through about a bottle of champagne a day, 3 bottles of brandy and whiskey a week. So he had to do something to supplement, to keep the champagne. There's a great thing about the correspondence between Winston and his wife Clementine, like no more champagne, the title of the book. So he had to keep up this prodigious level of journalism, writing history books, even screenplays. He was a very, very hard worker and extremely prolific writer, but he had to keep up this lifestyle to which he had become accustomed.
And of course, and he'd always say, he would say, of course I'm going to cut back, no more champagne. And then he'd find some excuse to be medicinal or social or political reasons, which he had to drink, because there's this, I am not me without my drink. So alcohol and Churchill was so fundamentally intertwined, weren't they? That he would say, I can't work without a drink. So therefore, if I can't work, I haven't got any money. So therefore, bugger the bill. Let's get more champagne.
Exactly. Well, you talk about how he couldn't work without drink, and he came up with interesting ways to get hold of it. He was on a lecture tour of America during Prohibition, and he was hit by a car. So he looked the wrong way on Fifth Avenue, and because they drive on the wrong side of the road in the States. And he was hit by a car, and he was in a hospital, and he couldn't get hold of any drink because he was in a hospital in the States. So he got a prescription from a doctor Otto C. Pickard from Lenox Hill Hospital.
Love that. Quack sounding name, that.
Yeah. It's like Dr. Nick Riviera. So this is what the prescription says from Dr. Otto Pickard. This is to certify that the post-accident convalescence of the Honourable Winston S. Churchill necessitates the use of alcoholic spirits, especially at mealtimes. The quantity is naturally indefinite, but the minimum requirements would be 250 cubic centimetres. So that's a day, and that's about a third of a bottle of whiskey. So that's a good, healthy amount.
I think that's just genius, for medicinal purposes, because he actually, I don't think he could function. And we'll come on to this later. He wasn't really an alcoholic, because by all accounts, and we've got some quotes later about how no one ever saw him roaring drunk. However much he drank, he had a capacity way beyond the average man to drink. But he really, he was, to say functioning alcoholic, slightly, puts a pious 21st century spin on the whole thing. He got better the more he drunk, funnier, more witty, more sharp. Unlike the rest of us who get sort of blithering.
And we think we're getting wittier and clever and stuff. Well, our producer Jago has produced a table of how much he was drinking during the war. So we're jumping to Churchill in his finest hour, and etc. Second World War. Churchill is prime minister. Cometh the hour, cometh the man, and this is made from diaries of people who work with him. So this is probably quite accurate. So we've got a kind of a sort of more a routine of his drinking. So we'll start at 7:30. So he wakes up, tea or coffee about 7:30.
And he spent a lot of time in bed with his wonderful bed jacket, sort of multicoloured. His daughter Mary would talk about, Papa in his wonderful jacket, but he would do lots of work from bed. So bed was his office until about sort of, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So this was a very key part. So anyway, sorry, go back to, so he's in bed, he's having his breakfast.
He's in bed, having his breakfast.
A big eater.
Then his papers come in, and he's got all his papers and stuff, working, dictation stuff, and he has one of his mouthwashes, Papa Cocktail, so a very weak Johnny Walker and soda.
And that would take him all the way through to lunch, wouldn't it?
Lunch. And then lunch is a big deal. Yeah. I don't think he stuck to rationing, did he?
Well, there's a brilliant book by a lovely person, Dr. Annie Gray, called Victory in the Kitchen. It's about Churchill's cook, Georgina, Lanimer, who was the most amazing cook, and was with the Churchills all the way through. Churchill liked to, he was very conscious of public image. So you'd see pictures of him being a man of the people, building a wall, things like that. And and genuinely, when during the Blitz, he was out with Clementine the whole time, there, come on, being the face. He was brave, he wanted to stay in Downing Street. He didn't want to go to, he wanted to just lead by example. But rationing, he was lucky because rationing, obviously things like offal were off ration. And he had lots of, dukes and people with huge estates who would send him game and send him eggs and all that sort of stuff. So it might be apocryphal, but there's a story that he said, I want to see what the ration is. So they brought it up and he was in bed and they put the ration on a tray. And he went, I don't know what, that's perfectly all right for a day. And they were like, Prime Minister, that's for a week. So I think he did, he didn't like, for example, once someone sent him a Stilton. And of course he accepted it, and this was right in the middle of the war. And of course this Manchester cheesemonger put a big thing saying, this is the Prime Minister's Stilton, of course. So it was an outraged local man wrote a letter to Downing Street saying, this is appalling, how come the Prime Minister's eating? And this worried Churchill and his team hugely, because anything that dents the public image, anything that would see Churchill as not being the ordinary man. But actually behind closed doors, he was eating quite well. She was an incredible cook, Georgina. And yes, so he had a very hearty appetite. He didn't like fine dining. He was much more, he loved beef. Yeah. Beef was quite difficult to get hold of in those days. But of course, from all around the world, past from South Africa, from America, from Australia, from New Zealand, parcels would be sent in, so he did have a lot of food. She was a very good cook, but he ate rather better, I'd say, than probably the average Brit. But that's no different from anyone else of his class at the time. You could also go out to the Dorchester, you go out to the Ritz, you go out to the, all those hotels. So yes, so he did eat well. He had very, very big appetites, but I would say he probably wasn't living on Walton pie.
No, and he drank very well. So over lunch, which the grouse that was sent to him by the Duke of Somewhere or other, and the beef from Argentina and stuff. Yeah. So he would have a pint of champagne. So a pint bottle, 560 milliliters of champagne, and then afterwards he might have a cognac or maybe a bit of port.
And he loved also one thing that he always brandy.
Yeah,
absolutely, and he had serious brandy. And he after lunch and after dinner. Of course, and famously, the King, George VI, during World War II, because in Buckingham Palace, booze, and they stuck very, very firmly to rationing. The King was always finding an excuse to nip over to Downing Street because he knew he'd be fed well and get a drink as well. And he had everyone loved coming to Downing Street because the food was amazing, and you'd always be well oiled. But yes, so anyway, so far we've had an imperial pint of champagne. So in those days, could you get a bottle, or was it not?
Yeah, you could get a pint bottle of champagne.
A pint of champagne is a very civilized thing.
It's a very civilized amount. But between two, it is actually the perfect amount. So a full bottle, actually a full bottle's pretty good between two as well.
Yeah, but you've got to sort of clear off the rest of the day, really, haven't you?
But if you have a pint before, share a pint, a couple of glasses each, then move on to. But he used to have a nap in the afternoon, which is incredible. I mean, I love a nap. So he used to take us an hour and a half nap. So no drinking then.
Yes, really.
And so, so he would sort of sleep it all off, wake up refreshed, bit more mouthwash when he got up, a bit more, another like light whiskey and soda, and then dinner where he'd probably have another pint of champagne, a bit more brandy.
Claret, Burgundy, he liked his clarets and Burgundies as well, and then port. Great fan of port. Always, no, we're not cutting back. We're going to cut back on port too, But yes, so this was this, and then after dinner, then of course he worked late into the night, didn't he?
Yeah, he worked late into the night, but all of this would have been consumed very slowly. It wasn't a sort of knocking it back. So probably he got through about 14, modern equivalent, 14 to 20 units daily, which is what our kind of, our health overlords tell us we should be drinking in a week. He got through in a day. But as you said, he worked very, very hard. He was up early, worked all day, apart from a nap. He was incredibly vigorous, and he worked until late at night, and he didn't slur his words. He didn't, fall over or anything. So there's a sort of debate about where. So there was this Scottish doctor, Dr. Ian Robertson, who wrote an article. I think it was for the BMJ, British Medical Journal, saying Churchill was clearly an alcoholic. And then I think it was Nicholas Soames
And Andrew Robertson, Sir Martin Gilbert, all the great, who
They wrote in and said, this is ridiculous. He clearly wasn't, because he managed to work the whole time.
And there's a great quote from a contemporary quote from Mackenzie Scott, or contemporary, who summed up the general review, and this is from Annie Scott's book. He took a great deal of wine to drink at dinner. It did not seem to affect him beyond quickening his intellect and intensifying his facility of expression. It really is such a delight to hear him converse. And Teddy Roosevelt felt the same, that alcohol actually improved him.
The other Roosevelt.
I'm sorry, not I wasn't. Yeah. Franklin D. Roosevelt. So Franklin D. Roosevelt agreed and said that this was it was a rare man that alcohol made him better. So it wasn't this idea of being this crazy, unreliable alcoholic like his son became this absolute shit of a thing, absolute arse. But no, Churchill was and this idea that he's a functional alcoholic. No, this he just basically surfed the alcoholic wave, but that's how a bit bad. It quickened him. That's what, without alcohol, he might not have been the man who pulled us through the war and, the Churchill for victory and all the rest of it. So, yes, I think it was absolutely key to Winston Churchill was alcohol.
Yeah, well, he has that famous quote, doesn't he? I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol is taken out of me.
And then the other one, this again, he endless classic quotes he gives, and this is the whole thing. I think you should read it in the thing about when Labour MP Bessie Braddock, this is 1946 after the war, and he was leaving the House of Commons, and she said, "Winston, you are drunk." And what did he reply?
"Madam, I may be drunk, but you are ugly, and tomorrow I will be sober." But this might not be true, because it doesn't sound. It's not very gallant, is it?
No, and I think he was. There are a lot of apocryphal. You can chuck any quote and say Churchill said it. It is. It's obviously very rude, but it's incredibly funny. But again, the fact is, it's actually very similar to the W.C. Fields quote, which says here, W.C.'s for another of life's great drinkers, and actually far more of an alcoholic than Churchill ever was, But one of the characters says, someone says, you're drunk, and he replies, "Yeah, and you're crazy, but I'll be sober tomorrow, and you'll be crazy for the rest of your life." So you see how these quotes come about, and perhaps Churchill, who loved films and loved American films, he might well have picked it up. So who knows?
Well, that's a perfect moment to take a break. We're very excited to have Taz here from Wylde Market again. So, with your box of goodies, highlight of the week, what have you got for us today?
Okay, so I've brought a lot of fish for you guys that's just been caught this week on Tuesday.
Fantastic. It's like Christmas.
Where does it come in from?
So the first amount, this is from Mark and Jim in Lyme Marine Reserve.
Right. So down in Dorset. Yeah.
So they're down there, and Jim actually worked with the Marine Reserve, and they're all like line caught, so they wanted it to all be very environmental.
So sustainable.
Happy fish that wanted to be caught.
Fish.
Yeah, and
exactly.
and very, very fresh.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got some skate.
I love skate.
That is my favorite. With capers, brown butter, maybe little shrimps.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Brown butter and brown shrimp.
Yeah.
Perfect. We've got some plaice.
You see, plaice very underrated. When it's this fresh, it's every bit as good as
How would you cook a bit of plaice, Tom?
I would literally just grill it.
Right.
I mean, I would probably skin it first, because this is so fresh that it's obviously good, and then just brush it with butter, bit of salt, put it under the grill. And you don't need a restaurant grill, you just need a home grill. Right. That's what I do. But the key to plaice is fresh, and this, you can feel how fresh. You can see even through the plastic.
It's smiling, isn't it?
Gleaming eyes and nice firm body.
It's literally like
rather like you, Tom.
No, the opposite of me.
Their boat will come in, and it literally has a little shack like on the beach where he's just standing there doing it and making it also.
You see, we have such good fish and we don't eat enough of it.
Yeah.
Now, this is one of my favourites, John Dory. You don't get a lot, because this is why it's called the St. Peter fish, because basically, apparently, St. Peter put his thumbprint on it, so it's called the San Pietro fish. This, you don't get a lot of meat of it, but it's so sweet and lovely, this fish. I think this is one of my favourite fish. And look at it. It could be alive. Again, winking and firm. Oh, that's a beauty.
When it's like the uglier the fish, the better it tastes.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. Look at that. Look at the beauty of a fish, that.
I've got 2 more. So these are actually from Alaska. They're from a guy called Tyson. He line courts them.
So they're going
or
to be
catches
salmon
them.
because we don't eat salmon. We can't eat salmon. There's no sustainably farmed salmon. I don't care if it's organic or anything else. It's bad fish, farmed salmon, in my view. Right. Sorry.
But this is
But
wild
this
salmon
is
from Alaska.
wild salmon line caught. So I've got 2. I've got a coho, just a normal. And then I've got a cold smoked.
Ooh.
So I love the fact that do you sell salmon, British? You don't sell farmed salmon?
No.
Yeah, woohoo.
God.
This is why I love you even more.
What's cool about the coho is that because it's got the skin on it still, sometimes there's actually scratches in it, and it's from the bears in Alaska trying to catch it in the water.
That's authentic, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you've got bear
Exactly.
scratches on your salmon. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And I've just brought some Cavallonero.
Oh,
to
you
bring
see this.
just to pair with
this
all
is
of it.
good for you. This is vitality in the...
Especially with a bit of bacon. I think if you cook that with a bit of bacon, it makes it even better for you and more delicious.
Cook it in a bit of lard as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Taz, that's another cracking box set. Thank you very, very much.
So Taz, if people want to get hold of all this wonderful fish, what do they do?
So basically, all the producers will send us their lists on a Friday. We put the market up at 5 o'clock. People can come on, buy whatever they like, and that will continue in. And we'll be dropping in things like all throughout the week. On Wednesday, we drop in fish. So all the fish that you've seen here, that will get dropped in, other than the salmon because it's coming from Alaska, so we have to book that a bit
Takes a bit
early.
while, yeah.
But yeah, all of the line caught fish will be coming straight in on Wednesday morning, and then we close at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, and it will
Right, so there's
delivered
quite a narrow window for the fresh fish.
yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, they literally will be getting driven up by Wednesday afternoon.
But you do
Yeah.
get the email reminder you, don't you? Once you
Yeah.
subscribe, you're told constantly about when to
So then the market
Yeah,
closes
definitely.
at 12.
Yeah, and then you'll get your food delivered to you by 12 o'clock on Friday.
Can you remind us of the website address?
Oh, yes, it's www.wylde.market, Wylde spelled WYLDE. If you refer your friend, you get £50 on the market, and your friend's going to get 30 plus free delivery. So
Hey.
everyone wins.
Everyone
And
wins.
when's that on till?
Just this month.
Just this month. Okay.
Amazing.
And there's also an app, isn't there?
Yes, there's
Yeah.
also an app. Get the app.
I am going to get the app, actually. I'm genuinely...
It's much better, and you also get little sneak peek like updates of things that we've just randomly dropped in. We've heard from producers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Taz.
Thank you,
Thank
Taz.
you.
As is, exciting.
You are our favourite person.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Intoxicating History, brought to you by our wonderful sponsors, Wylde Market. And we should sort of very briefly touch on the sort of black dog thing, because this is another one that Andrew Roberts, the great historian of
Yeah, and I
Churchill,
love his books.
sort of poo-poos, because people say, Churchill, black dog, depression, and apparently, according to Andrew Roberts, he only uses the phrase once, black dog, in 1911, and it's become this thing that people associate with Churchill, when actually, he was prone to melancholy,
Yeah.
prone to highs and lows, but certainly wasn't what we would think of as bipolar or anything like that.
No, and again, it was this argument that alcohol was actually the stabilizer that pulled him out of these black moods. And he did occasionally, especially, more in the later years, retire to bed, and shut the doors and the rest of it. He was also, there's a wonderful thing, his household he was always walking around naked. And this huge, rather portly form. And of course, the wonderful, she was furious. Georgina Lanham, the beloved, Churchill's beloved cook, Victory in the Kitchen, the life of Churchill cook. And she would always tell him off. So really do we have to walk? Because he'd be leaping, as he always loved his bath, have a cigar in the bath and a drink in the bath, like very civilized thing to do. But then he wouldn't bother with clothes. He'd wander from there into his dressing room and occasionally wander downstairs absolutely butt naked, and it probably wasn't the most, he wasn't an Adonis by any sort of great man. Anyway, but she was always reprimanding, and all of them were always sort of trying to avert their eyes as he sort of nipped from dressing room to bathroom completely naked.
His sort of fame as a drinker meant that when he came into contact with Stalin, especially, things got quite boozy, as you can imagine. Stalin, Russian, all that sort of stuff.
Drinkplomacy, as they call
Yeah,
it.
drink diplomacy. So I think Stalin was very keen to meet Churchill and basically try and outdrink him. So the first meeting they had was in Moscow in 1942, and it was, I think, it was potentially one that could have been rather difficult, because Stalin wanted the Allies to invade Germany from
Second front, yeah.
Second front, exactly. And there was going to be no second front. So things could have been very, very difficult. So they were dining on suckling pig and innumerable bottles.
And I love this drinking. So you had Sir Alexander Cadogan, the sort of classic upper class diplomat who was there, and he described the beverages as savage because Stalin forced Cadogan to drink pepper vodka, which I absolutely love pepper vodka, but in huge quantities. And if you're not a vodka drinker, those Russians, they're suckled on vodka, especially in those days. So Churchill basically, said he had a headache and stuck to the comparatively innocuous, effervescent Caucasian red wine. So what a Georgian sweet,
Yeah, a Georgian wine.
but they drunk basically till 3 a.m. And Churchill sort of moved the conversation. It was that, and that was, he could take on Stalin, a legendary vodka drinker. And I think that personal connection, although Stalin was obviously a monster in every way, I think Churchill managed to sort of impress him, didn't he, in that sort of way?
I think so, yeah. Though the next time they met, Churchill was actually appalled by Stalin's monstrousness. So that was in Tehran in 1943.
A dinner with 45 toasts.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So this was, you have to drink to Comrade Stalin, to the revolution, to the Allies. And then one of the toasts was that Stalin did was to the 50,000 German officers he had just executed. And Churchill was like, that's barbaric. We don't do that. And he actually walked out.
And he said that he'd rather be taken out into the garden and shot himself than sully his own and his country's honour by such infamy.
Yeah.
Quite right. And then we have a few more sort of drink diplomacy incidents, don't we?
Well, so Yalta, which was the in Crimea in 1945. So this is where they sort of carved up Europe, and it was pretty awful morally, a pretty awful affair. So Churchill was drinking buckets of Caucasian champagne, which would undermine the health of any ordinary man.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of Soviet version of champagne, which was often called champagne-ski.
And what was it like? Is it?
I think it was sweet. I've never tried it, but there's a huge sparkling wine industry, but particularly in Ukraine, but also to Georgia and places like that. But there was so this is where things get a bit kind of not so sort of morally correct. So Churchill and Stalin carved up the Balkans on a scrap of paper. 90% of Greece to Britain, 90% of Romania to Russia, 50-50 Yugoslavia. Churchill pushed the paper across the table. Stalin ticked with a blue pencil. So that's how these two men over buckets of Caucasian champagne carved up Europe. Churchill referred to it as the naughty document. So he was kind of aware that, but
I mean, this was literally two men carving up and sort of planting the seeds for many, many decades of
trouble.
Trial and tribulation, exactly.
Well, that's a perfect moment to take a break. Welcome back to Intoxicating History, sponsored by Wylde Market.
On to FDR. So FDR was at Yalta, and FDR was famous for the bad quality of his cocktails. He thought himself a master mixologist, didn't he?
Yeah. And Churchill hated his cocktails. He thought they were... Churchill wasn't a big cocktail fan. He liked his spirits neat.
Yeah.
Or not at all. So he was made an FDR cocktail at the White House, and he poured it in a flower pot because he thought it was revolting. And
FDR's reputation is gin vermouth, olive brine, lemon twist, a dirty, messy martini, often made with indiscriminate ratios. So there's nothing pure about these cocktails, and probably a bit warm as well.
No, I don't think Alessandro from Duke's would approve of that, would he?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And then what about the bow to France myth?
Yes, well, I think it's probably apocryphal. When you're making a gin martini, don't actually put any vermouth in, just bow to France. But Churchill wasn't a martini drinker.
Well, exactly. And they say there's two other classic martini quotations that Churchill often is ascribed to Churchill. One is get the vermouth, put it in front of the martini, let the sun shine through the vermouth, and that's enough vermouth. The other one was ring up your friend in America, get him to put the vermouth at the other end of the telephone, put your martini there, and that's exactly the right amount of vermouth. But again, he didn't drink cocktails. So this is nice to chuck everything. And this is the great Churchill legend, is that, you know, if it's about drink, Churchill said it, but he wasn't a cocktail man at all, was he?
No, not at all. So the last bit of drink diplomacy, which I think really, really amuses me. So this was in 1945, and Churchill was having a meeting with King Ibn Saud from what is now Saudi Arabia.
Of course, who, being a devout Muslim, would not drink, especially or tobacco as well.
So he abstained from alcohol and tobacco, obviously for religious reasons. And Churchill declared that his own religion prescribed smoking cigars and drinking alcohol before, after, and during all meals as an absolutely sacred rite.
Here.
So we can have a quick look at what Churchill was actually drinking, sort of specific brands. Obviously, we've touched on this, but the big one was Paul Roger. So he met Odette Paul Roger, who was obviously from the family who owned the Champagne House, at a lunch in Paris in November 1945. So a sort of victory lunch. And Churchill was, Churchill, it wasn't a philanderer, but he had an eye for a pretty lady, didn't he?
Yes, I think he appreciated beauty and quality, whether it was food or booze or women or houses or paintings. He was an accomplished, amateur artist as well. He spent a lot of time. But yes, so he did. I don't think he wasn't a philanderer, but he appreciated a pretty lady.
Yeah. So she was obviously very taken with Church as well, because he was a very charming man, and she sent him cases of vintage champagne every birthday.
Oh. And then he famously called old Odette Paul Roger's house at 44 Avenue de Champagne the world's most drinkable address. But and so the vintage, he loved the 28. Now, obviously, champagne you're not going to find. My father has a real taste for. He sort of goes to auctions and buys old champagne, and he loves it when it tastes of donkey pee and the fizz is gone. It looks the colour of donkey pee, not tastes like. And occasionally you'll get one bottle out of 12 that still has its fizz.
Yeah.
And it really is something very special in it. But would a 28, even kept under the best conditions, it wouldn't be drinkable now?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could drink it now, and there might be a tiny bit of fizz, but it would be a bit more like a sherry or something.
It'd be dark yellow, wouldn't it?
It would be quite dark. I think people do occasionally drink very, very old champagne.
Yeah.
I think after about sort of 40 years, it's just such a totally different drink.
Yeah.
You can't really. But I love it. I found a bottle of, this is completely sort of like off topic. I found a bottle in my parents' garage. I found a bottle of Ayala Demi-Sec 1975, so a sort of semi-sweet one, and we opened it, and it was actually delicious, and there was a tiny bit of fizz left. It was very sort of nutty and stuff. So an old champagne can be delicious.
Now the pint bottle. Now I remember when after all this nonsense of Brexit, and someone I think so. Well, the upside is that we'll be able to serve champagne in pint bottles again. Who was that?
Well, so this was a publicity stunt by James Simpson, who is the MD of Paul Roger UK.
Yeah.
So when the sort of Brexit thing came in, he said, "Now we're out of the EU. We're not constrained by their rules. We can bottle and sell champagne in a pint bottle for the British market." And it was a sort of publicity stunt, because they're not going to actually get a glassmaker to make a 568 milliliter bottle. It was a publicity stunt, and it was a good way of getting attention. And people got very upset about it.
Yeah,
so people were all kind of like, "Oh, Farage, oh, Brexit, oh, pint bottles. Is this all we get?"
Yeah.
So it was a sort of publicity stunt. I think that's what he claimed.
But Churchill did say half a bottle. Well, I think you better read it.
Half a bottle is too little, and a whole bottle too much. So pint bottle, perfect size for two.
And they did release a pint bottle, did they? Back in the day.
They used to have it in pint bottles. So the Churchill connection has continued up to the present day. So when he died in 1965, they put a black border around the.
Is that still there?
No. That was just sort of temporarily on the champagne shipped to Britain. And then in 1984, they launched their prestige cuvée, their very, very upmarket sort of Dom Perignon type one, called, of course, the cuvée Sir Winston Churchill, which is a very heavy Pinot Noir dominated champagne. It's absolutely superb.
And you can still drink. You can still buy it now.
Oh yeah. So they release it in a great vintage. I think the latest vintage is 2018. and it's really meaty. It's a wonderful champagne, and they still, they make much of the link. Obviously because it's a strong one, but it's a very big thing for them, and it's a very personal thing. It's not something that's just for marketing. They feel it. They feel the sort of the affection. And then also the affection between the two countries.
Yeah.
So the sort of Paul Roger is thought of as the most English of champagnes, and I don't know if this is true, but they always say that they keep the champagne for longer for the English market before putting it on the market, so that it's a little bit richer, a little bit more aged.
Love Paul Roger. It's just fantastic. Anyway, now the other one, we've covered this in previous episode, but it was Johnny Walker Red. And that's what he would drink, was it? Because single malts, we think, have been around forever, but they weren't that big back then. Single malts were blended with my grandfather, who's obviously much younger than, but he fought in World War II. He was very much a grouse man. He didn't see the point with single malts. He liked the smoothness of the blend. Why waste all this? I once bought him a single malt. Thank you, darling, but yeah. Do you like the grouse? But so Johnny Walker Red was the classic. It was a classic colonial drink as well, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, it was. Single malts were very, very obscure in the sort of 40s until the sort of 70s, when Glenfiddich began bottling and selling them. Most whiskey was blended from malts, and it would have been drunk with soda water. So there was no point doing that with your single malt, which you probably couldn't get hold of anyway. You'd have to actually go to a merchant up in Elgin and order it, especially. And there wasn't really such a thing as people just drank the same whiskey. And most people drank Johnny Walker Red, or people might drink a cheaper brand.
And then occasionally he would have a bit of black, which is more expensive. But he there's this contrast, isn't there, of his liking just plain everyday whiskey. Yeah. Not that it's everyday, but sort of not the most.
No, it is. I mean, Johnny Walker Red is a sort of it's good quality.
And then, but yet he loved his Moutons and Lafittes and his DRCs, and he had a great. He loved good Bordeaux and claret, like most of the other upper class at the time, great claret drinkers, and especially the first gross. But so Johnny Walker Red, we've got Paul Roger, and then brandy. What brandy would you drink?
Brandy, I think he was a bit more discerning because he drank it neat. Yeah. So he was a Hine, which is another one of those kind of great sort of Anglophile houses. So Hine was founded by I think a Devonian, or certainly by an Englishman in the 18th century, and it was one that always had a very, very strong connection with England. So he would have probably a vintage cognac, so something that was quite upmarket, which he'd drink after dinner, neat. But the other one that was connected with him, which this may be apocryphal, is Armenian brandy. So the story is that when he was with Stalin drinking, he took a shine to Armenian brandy. Now, Armenian brandy is actually extremely good. They used to call it cognac, Konyak,
Yeah.
And it's made from some local grapes in Armenia. It's aged in wood for a long time. And today the quality is very high. And I imagine it probably would have been in the 1940s. And it was like the sort of Johnny Walker Black Label of the Soviet Empire. So if you wanted to bribe an official, you wanted to get something done, you turn up with a bottle of Yerevan, Ararat, or brandy from Armenia, and that would it might. I was going to say, would get your brother out of the gulag. Perhaps wouldn't go that far, but you might be able to get hold of something else. And so there's a myth that he picked up a taste for it while he was bargaining with Stalin, and that every year Stalin used to send him a case of it. There's absolutely no evidence for this at all, but if you go to the Yerevan Brandy Company in Armenia, they tell the Churchill story. And apparently there are Georgian brandies that do the same. So if you go to like the Tbilisi Brandy Company or whatever it is, they will tell you that Churchill loved Georgian brandy more than anything else.
We're talking about all these wonderful champagnes. We're talking about all these wonderful brandies, claret, first gross, all the rest of it. But there's one drink that you might be quite surprised about that has quite a strong link to Churchill. When Churchill apparently visited Copenhagen in 1950, to celebrate not just his visit, but also the fact that they'd been under occupation for 5 years and they'd been liberated, they created special brew in his honour. 9% tastes like piss, but it really does. It really is one of the sort of strongest, nastiest drinks. And of course, so you have this connection of Churchill, and it was seen as a strong drink for a strong man and celebratory. The problem was the PR wasn't quite so good because, of course, it went from being this Churchillian strong lager down through the years to, as I say, a drink at 9% beloved by people who liked a strong drink, cheap strong beer, teenagers and all the rest of it. And so quietly that connection to Churchill was sort of slightly erased, and they took down apparently the alcohol content of Special Brew from 9 to 7%. But it is one of those drinks that you wouldn't expect.
I'm going to push back on the Special Brew thing, because Kingsley Amis, who wrote a lot on alcohol and obviously drank a lot, he was a big Special Brew fan, and he used to drink it half and half with ordinary Carlsberg Export. So just to temper the alcohol. And Special Brew, I mean, it's not like a nice pint of Harvey's Best. But for a ferociously strong beer, it is quite nice. It actually tastes like beer. It's got a sort of fruitiness, it's got a hoppiness, and especially if you mix it with something a little bit less strong, it's a huge cut above Tennant Super.
Well, that's not saying a lot. I agree. I mean, I just remember getting drunk on it very young. There's some at my parents' house, and I was sort of sat in the cellar. And we thought, we'll have a go at this. Never been so sick in my whole life. So actually, I'm speaking of experience, probably sort of 30, 40 years ago. Anyway, that's by the by. So that was the one, I love. That was a genius. So Churchill and Special Brew, you can imagine with this tin of Special Brew.
Yeah, until we started researching this episode, I had no idea.
Nor did I. Absolutely genius, that. But, summing up now, there's this great thing that Churchill was this functioning alcoholic and drunk too much. But I think that's entirely untrue. I think it made him the man he was.
Yeah, and it was part of his image. It was sort of performative. So, a bit like sort of Dean Martin, who was always there with a drink in his hand, but wasn't actually drunk. It was the same with Churchill.
And it was very much, he was a man, as we've said, so conscious of his public image that, the British like a drinker. We like people who like their drink and who aren't too sort of pious and sanctimonious and teetotal and prissy and all the rest of it. So, he was one of those rare men who could drink far more than the average man or woman could drink, and it actually improved him. So I think that, without booze, Churchill might not have been the man he was.
I think he's a great role model for us in these dark times of dry January. I think Churchill is a role model.
I wish we had something to toast him with, especially a bottle of Paul Roger,
or a can of Special Brew.
But I think a great man, a great drinker, and one of those rare cases where drink made the man better. Intoxicating History is brought to you in association with Wylde Market, the online farmers market. The show is executive produced by Melanie Jappi and Jago Lee, and is a Telltale Industries production.